Do you know that Isaac Newton, do you know who he was?
Can you repeat the last part?
Do you know Isaac Newton?
Yeah.
Isaac Newton was probably, if not the smartest person, one of the smartest people who ever lived. Okay? And as brilliant as he was, he thought gravity was a force. Right? And Newton's laws of gravitation seem to work pretty good. Okay, with massive predictive capability, but along comes Einstein and displaced the smartest man who ever lived with his theory of relativity that gravity is simply not a force. It's the curvature of space that gives the illusion that there's a force, right? So the point is this: when you reject the Christian worldview, when you state how things are, you're going to have to defend that from the ground up. I can't grant you anything foundationally. So when you start talking about the reality of science and the knowledge base of science and the reason why you have predictive capability, all right? Well, you're presupposing that the world around you operates in terms of causal sequencing and laws of nature. But is causal sequencing and laws of nature, have they been instituted and secured? Or is it simply the illusion? Because if I put you on a jet plane right now and we go visit India, there are millions of people there who believe that the physical world around us is an illusion. It's called Maya. Okay? So the regularities that you seemingly experience, are they driven by something that's secured regularities, or are the regularities just chance and happenstance, creating the illusion that we're in a law-like world? Which is it? You see, if you reject God as the grand lawgiver and creator, that he institutes causality and laws of nature, then on what grounds do you believe in causality and laws of nature? What grounds? Why? Because you have why? Because you have predictive capability? A chicken can tell a young chicken, look, there's the law of the farmer. Every morning he comes out at 9 o'clock. And this has been happening ever since I've been alive. And watch, I'm going to predict every day for the next year that farmer's going to come out and he's going to sprinkle free food for us to eat. And every day he comes out and says, see what I told you? Look at the predictive success that I have. 365 days, the farmer comes out at 9 o'clock. And on the first day of the next year, the farmer comes out, and instead of reaching into his bag and spreading corn and seed on the ground for the chickens, he grabs that chicken, puts it up on the chopping block, and cuts its head off. So much for the law of the farmer. Just because you deeply and devoutly believe that there are actual laws, fine. But deeply believing something doesn't necessitate that it's the case. Do you have a logically necessary line of reasoning that there is something that is instituted and secured the continuity of regularity? And the answer is you don't. You just simply adopt causality and laws of nature without rational justification. You're violating your own principle. You say, oh, I don't have a good reason to believe in God. Do you have a good reason to believe that there is something that has instituted and secured causality as opposed to the illusion of causality and laws of nature?
Nah.
So you see, when you believe in science, you're violating your own criterion of belief that you use to dismiss God. So if you're going to stick to that criterion of belief to dismiss belief in God, then you have to dismiss belief in science. Because if you don't, you are violating your own criterion of belief.
What? I guess she had another question, which was on good. Like, how can, like, if the Christian God does not exist, why does good not exist, essentially?
Because what is good, what is good is that which reflects and conforms to the eternal character and nature of God. Okay?
Yeah.
When God got done creating on day 6, on the 7th day, God surveyed all that he had done, and he had declared that it was good because it was complete, it was not deficient, and it conformed and reflected his character and nature. Now, if somebody says something is not good, then it's deviating from some criterion or standard.
Yeah. So
in a world without God, what would be your criterion of what would be good?
I make up my own rules of good and bad. And
then what you have now conceded to is arbitrariness. Do you know who Ted Bundy was?
a killer.
Yeah, and what he used to do was lure young women like yourself and for the fun of it, kill them. He made up his own rules of good and bad.
Savage.
Now, imagine that there's another Ted Bundy and he kidnaps your sister and tortures, rapes, and murders her just for the fun of it.
Then I'm going to go over there and do the same thing to his dumbass.
No, but you see, here's the deal. On what grounds could you object to what he did when he kills your sister? Because he could say, hey, honey, I make up my own rules. You make up your rules, I make up mine.
Would she be able to?
Do you see that when we start to apply the implications of your God rejection to your world begins to crumble all around you. It crumbles in terms of meaning and intelligibility. You think you have intelligibility without reference to God, but when we examine it, it turns out that you don't. And the only reason why you will reject that is because you don't want to face the music. Right? You cannot get away from believing that something is absolute. And if you do not believe that God is absolute, you'll have to believe that something else is absolute, because without which you wouldn't be able even to say that the red apple is on the counter. It wouldn't mean anything unless you conceptually or metaphysically had something that was absolute, that institutes and secures possibility and impossibility so that you could talk about redness and appleness and counter. You see, you think that you can do without God, but you can't. But the only reason why you think you do is because you haven't taken the time in a thought experiment to really see if it works. Right? You know, there have been previous models about how we would get to the moon or how we get to the Mars, and they've been rejected because the thought experiments say that no, this will not be. Right? Well, that's the problem when you start to reason about facts and interpretation of facts in a world without God. It ultimately implodes and collapses upon itself metaphysically. And the only reason why you don't realize that is because you don't want to examine your system. This is what all atheists do. They refuse to examine their system, and they keep on whistling past the graveyard, like Matt the Bloviator on the Atheist Experience. He keeps on wanting to say, well, I have no need of believing in God. But then he wants to talk about that he possesses the capacity to reason and that certain things work. Well, how does he know how that things work? Based upon what?
I think, yeah, like definitely focusing on the morality question would be useful. Be like,
no, because although we can develop a powerful or moral argument for God, atheists just they don't care. We have to go for something that is more lethal to them, and that is their own ability to not only reason but to make sense of even the simplest of facts. And when they dismiss God as unworthy of being adopted and accepted as being what is ultimate and absolute, from which all possibility and impossibility derives, we can then show them that they can no longer invoke possibility and impossibility and talk about facts. They think they can because they simply haven't taken the time to examine how facts would be meaningful and intelligible in a God-free world. In a God-free world, you wouldn't have any facts. And if somebody disagrees with that, they can tell me how they have a fact for anything in a God-free world. Because if they tell me this, I'm going to say, good, explain to me the context that provides for that fact. Since the context is not God himself, what is the metaphysical environment or context that provides for fact X or fact Y or Z? What is that final and outer context? Merely telling me that the context is you're in a particular country or state or province on a planet circling the sun, that's not going to suffice. This is why the proof of God is that refusing his self-disclosure and natural and special revelation is then you couldn't prove anything.
That's true. So
in other words, it's so catastrophic that if you remain in disbelief that God is, and that God has revealed himself through natural, all of creation, and special revelation through human history, it's so catastrophic that you're going to have to sit there in your unbelief and be quiet. Because if you don't, any fact that comes out of your mouth, I'm going to say, what is the metaphysical context and environment that provides for its actuality and intelligibility? Since it's not God, what is it? And there will be no ultimate outer contextual layer for you to place and interpret facts.
Yes, that's true.